Your kind doesn't belong here. Officer Blake's words cut through the humid Georgia air as he slams Judge Marcus Thompson face first against his rental car at a highway rest stop. The decorated federal judge, traveling incognito to his new courthouse assignment, feels the cold metal of handcuffs bite his wrists. Blake's partner, Officer Cruz, films it, laughing. "This'll go viral." Cruz sneers, not knowing he's recording his own career's end. Marcus stays silent, memorizing badge numbers, calculating. Tomorrow these same officers will stand before his bench for their disciplinary hearing, but they don't know that yet. Judge Marcus Thompson, 45 years old, pulls into Pinewood Rest Stop at 9 p.m., exhausted from his 6-hour drive to assume his new federal position. He's deliberately dressed down, jeans, t-shirt, baseball cap, wanting anonymity before tomorrow's high-profile assignment. The rental car's out-of-state plates catch the attention of Officers Blake and Cruz, who are conducting their usual revenue patrol along this stretch of highway. Blake, 28, exchanges a knowing look with his partner Cruz, 31. They've done this dance before, targeting travelers who look like easy marks for bogus violations. Blake radios dispatch about a suspicious vehicle, while Cruz circles the car like a predator searching for any excuse to escalate. Marcus stretches his legs and checks his phone, reviewing tomorrow's docket. He sees a disciplinary hearing scheduled for 2 p.m. Officers Blake and Cruz facing charges of racial profiling. The irony hasn't revealed itself yet. Marcus doesn't recognize the names, and they don't know they're about to harass the man who'll decide their professional fate in less than 18 hours. "License and registration," Blake demands, his tone immediately hostile. Marcus complies calmly, hands steady despite the familiar dread that creeps up his spine. Years of judicial experience taught him to read people, and he sees the hate burning in Blake's eyes like a flickering flame ready to ignite. Cruz peers through the passenger window, searching for anything to justify their suspicion. "What brings you to our town?" The possessive hour drips with territorial racism that makes Marcus's jaw tighten imperceptibly. Marcus answers honestly, "New job, driving through, minding his own business." This triggers more suspicion rather than less. "What kind of job?" Blake's interrogation intensifies, each question designed to trap rather than clarify. Marcus considers revealing his position but decides against it. Tomorrow's hearing requires impartiality, and he needs to see their true nature unfiltered by the panic that would follow if they knew who he really was. This decision will cost him his dignity but preserve justice. Blake finds an expired air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror and claims it's drug paraphernalia. Cruz discovers a legal pad with case notes in the back seat and calls it suspicious documentation. They're building a false narrative, brick by brick, each manufactured violation adding to their justification for what comes next. Marcus watches them work with the detached fascination of a scientist observing predators in their natural habitat. These are the same tactics that have destroyed countless lives in courtrooms across America. "Step out of the vehicle," Blake commands, his hand resting on his service weapon for emphasis. "Hands where I can see them." Marcus complies slowly, deliberately, knowing any sudden movement could escalate this encounter into a tragedy. His judicial training kicks in automatically. Catalogue every violation, memorize every detail, build the case that will destroy them both. Blake's pat-down is aggressive and invasive, designed to humiliate rather than ensure safety. He finds Marcus's wallet and flips through it mockingly, squinting at the federal employee identification card in the dim parking lot lighting. "Federal employee? What is this, some kind of fake?" Blake can't read federal judge clearly in the darkness, and his prejudice blinds him to the possibility that a black man might hold such a position. Cruz activates his body camera, but angles it carefully to miss his partner's worst behavior. They've perfected this choreography over years of practice, documented compliance, while orchestrating systematic abuse. "For our protection," Cruz smirks, knowing the footage will later be edited to support whatever story they choose to tell. Marcus's judicial mind catalogues every constitutional violation as it happens. Unlawful search, racial profiling, excessive force without justification. He'll remember every detail when he sits behind his bench tomorrow. But right now, he's just another black man being terrorized by officers who've forgotten their oath to serve and protect. "You dealing drugs?" Blake's questions become accusations without evidence. "Running guns?" What's the real story here? When Marcus calmly denies everything, maintaining the composure that comes from years of dealing with hostile attorneys, Blake grows more aggressive. "Don't lie to me, boy." The racial slur hangs in the humid air like a physical blow, and Marcus's jaw tightens slightly, the only visible reaction he allows himself. Inside, righteous fury builds like pressure in a steam engine, but judicial training keeps him controlled and calculating. Justice delayed isn't justice denied when you're planning to serve it ice cold from behind a federal bench. Blake calls for backup, claiming an uncooperative suspect, and soon the rest stop fills with flashing lights and additional officers who slow down to watch the show. The situation spirals into calculated cruelty as Blake forces Marcus to his knees on the rough asphalt, hands behind his head in the classic position of surrender. "Stay put while we search properly," Blake orders, savoring every moment of perceived dominance. The position is designed to degrade, to break spirit through powerlessness, and Marcus feels the sting of gravel biting through his jeans. Cruz films the scene with his personal phone while his body camera records official footage, creating a documentary of abuse for his entertainment and their legal protection. "Caught another one trying to run drugs through our county," Cruz narrates to his phone's camera, playing to an invisible audience of fellow racists and badge worshippers. Marcus becomes unwilling content for their twisted entertainment, while other travelers hurry past, some stopping to stare at the spectacle. A family with young children walks by, the father hurrying them along, while a little black girl about 8 years old stares with wide, confused eyes. Marcus locks eyes with her and sees future trauma being implanted, the lesson that looking like him makes you a target in America. Blake plants evidence with practiced ease, producing a small baggie he claims was hidden under the seat. Marcus watches helplessly as his word becomes worthless against a badge, understanding viscerally how the justice system fails people who look like him. "Now we're getting somewhere," Blake grins with predatory satisfaction. Possession with intent to distribute. The lie becomes official record, documented by cameras that will later be edited to support their version of events. The backup officers arrive but don't intervene, understanding their role in this theater of oppression. They've seen Blake's shows before and know to stay silent, complicity through inaction, creating a brotherhood that protects its worst members. Marcus catalogues their badge numbers too, mental notes for the reckoning. A tow truck arrives to impound the rental car, and Marcus watches his possessions, including tomorrow's court documents, disappear into official custody, while Blake grins at the additional insult of impound fees. The handcuffs bite deeper as Marcus kneels longer, his knees bleeding through his jeans as the asphalt proves unforgiving. Physical pain pales beside the spiritual assault of being reduced to roadside spectacle for racist entertainment. But Marcus's mind stays sharp and focused. He's gathering evidence with each passing second of abuse, building the case that will end their careers and possibly send them to federal prison. Blake leans close, breath hot with coffee and hatred. "Remember this night?" he whispers. "Remember who's really in charge here." Handcuffed in the patrol car's back seat, Marcus makes a silent vow that has nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. The distinction matters to a man who spent 20 years of his career balancing the scales of justice with mathematical precision. Tomorrow, these officers will learn the difference between power and authority, between temporary dominance and lasting consequence. Blake drives toward the station, regaling Cruz with stories of past encounters with black motorists, speaking freely because they assume their victim is just another nameless man who'll disappear into the system. "Remember that college boy last month?" Blake laughs with genuine pleasure. "Thought he was so smart with his fancy words and proper English, still couldn't talk his way out of a night in lockup." Cruz joins the laughter, and they build their own case file with every word, creating the evidence Marcus will use to destroy them both. Their casual racism reveals years of practice, countless unreported incidents, a pattern of abuse hidden behind badges and blue walls of silence. At the station, Marcus requests his constitutional right to a phone call. The desk sergeant, younger and less corrupted than his colleagues, almost shows sympathy before Blake intervenes with theatrical authority. "Drug dealers don't get special treatment in my house," he declares, "but legal rights can't be denied entirely. Even Blake knows that much law." Marcus dials his law clerk Sarah, speaking carefully in code they've established for emergencies. "This is Judge Thompson. I need you to reschedule my 8 a.m. meeting and confirm tomorrow's 2 p.m. hearing is still on the docket." Sarah understands immediately that something's wrong and stays alert for further instructions. Blake snatches the phone mid-conversation, ending the call with brutal efficiency, but enough was communicated. Sarah will investigate, prepare contingencies, and ensure tomorrow's justice proceeds smoothly, despite whatever's happened to her boss. The machinery of the federal court system quietly mobilizes around their imprisoned judge, while Blake congratulates himself on maintaining control. In his cell, Marcus meditates on the path ahead with the patience that comes from understanding how justice really works. He could reveal his identity now, watch them scramble with damage control, accept their panicked apologies and desperate attempts to undo what they've done. But that would teach them nothing, except to be more careful about who they choose as their next victim. True justice requires they face consequences for who they chose to be tonight, not panic over who they accidentally targeted. Tomorrow they'll stand before his bench, believing they're untouchable, and the shock of recognition will be their first lesson in accountability. Morning brings fresh humiliation as Blake processes Marcus's release with theatrical slowness, savoring every moment of perceived power like fine wine. "Here's your stuff," he says, dumping Marcus's possessions carelessly across the counter with deliberate disrespect. "Try to stay out of trouble now." The rental car sits in impound, requiring fees and paperwork that Blake has designed to be as complicated and expensive as possible. He watches Marcus struggle with public transportation options, enjoying the inconvenience he's created like an artist admiring his masterpiece. The local cab driver, Robert, is a 70-year-old black man who recognizes the signs immediately. "They got you too, huh?" he asks quietly as Marcus climbs into the back seat. When Marcus nods, Robert shares stories that reveal this isn't an isolated incident. Blake and Cruz have a reputation in the black community that spans years of abuse. "Been happening since they joined the force," Robert explains. "Nobody believes us when we file complaints. Internal Affairs says it's our word against theirs." Robert drives Marcus to a car rental agency while sharing stories of other victims, painting a picture of systematic predation disguised as law enforcement. Marcus realizes he's witnessed the tip of an iceberg that extends deep into the department's culture. Tomorrow's hearing will address more than one incident. It'll expose a pattern of constitutional violations that demands federal intervention. At the rental agency, Marcus changes into his judicial robes in the restroom, the transformation symbolic of his journey from victim to arbiter of justice. The black robes feel different today, heavier with the weight of personal experience and righteous purpose. Marcus checks the time, 1:30 p.m. Blake and Cruz's disciplinary hearing begins in 30 minutes, and they have no idea they're walking into a trap of their own making. Meanwhile, at the police station, Blake and Cruz prepare confidently for what they assume will be another token procedure. They've attended disciplinary hearings before, usually meaningless bureaucratic exercises where their union representatives negotiate minimal consequences like sensitivity training or brief suspensions. "Probably just a slap on the wrist," Blake laughs as he adjusts his dress uniform. "We'll be back on patrol next week, teaching more lessons to people who forget their place." They arrive at the courthouse in full ceremonial dress, playing the part of professional officers while their lawyer briefs them on the hearing's supposed formality. Neither realizes they're walking confidently toward their professional execution, orchestrated by the man they humiliated less than 18 hours ago. The courtroom fills with participants who have no idea they're about to witness legal history in the making. Blake and Cruz sit beside their union representative, casual and confident, reviewing prepared statements that deny wrongdoing and minimize their actions as justified law enforcement. They plan to claim they followed proper protocol while dealing with suspicious behavior, the same defense that's protected countless officers before them. Court staff prepare the bench as Marcus reviews the case file in his chambers, seeing their pattern of abuse documented in black and white. The formal complaint details years of racial profiling, excessive force, and constitutional violations, but it doesn't mention last night's personal demonstration of their methods. Blake notices the nameplate reading Honorable Marcus Thompson, and the name seems vaguely familiar, but he can't place it in his memory. "Probably some liberal judge from up north," he mutters to Cruz, their lawyer shushing them to maintain professional appearances while the bailiff calls the court to order. Marcus enters wearing his full judicial robes, the same garments Blake and Cruz dismissed as costume stuff when they searched his luggage. The bailiff announces with traditional ceremony, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marcus Thompson," and Blake and Cruz stand mechanically without making the connection. Their focus remains on minimizing consequences rather than identifying the man who holds their futures in his hands. And the psychological tension builds as participants sense something unusual brewing in the air. This hearing will address complaints filed against Officers Blake and Cruz regarding their conduct during traffic enforcement operations, Marcus announces, his voice carrying the authority accumulated through 20 years of delivering justice. He surveys the courtroom with practiced judicial detachment, his gaze passing over Blake and Cruz without apparent recognition. The irony hangs thick in the air. The man they called boy now towers above them from the federal bench, cloaked in the authority they mocked. Blake shifts uncomfortably in his chair, sensing hostility he can't explain or identify. This judge seems different somehow, more intense, more personal than the administrative officials they usually face. Cruz whispers nervously to their lawyer about requesting a different judge, but their representative dismisses their concerns as pre-hearing jitters. "Just stay calm and stick to our story," he advises, unaware that their story is about to become evidence in their own prosecution. The formal hearing begins with video evidence playing on courtroom monitors, body camera footage from various incidents showing Blake and Cruz's systematic pattern of abuse across multiple victims. Marcus watches their faces carefully as their own actions condemn them, noting how their confidence wavers as the scope of evidence becomes clear. Community members take the witness stand one by one, describing years of harassment, illegal searches, and threats that paint a picture of institutional terrorism disguised as law enforcement. Robert, the elderly cab driver, testifies about decades of complaints ignored by internal affairs and supervisors who prioritized protecting officers over protecting citizens. "I've been documenting their behavior for 15 years, he tells the court, his voice steady with the dignity of a man who suffered in silence too long. "Every complaint got buried. Every witness got ignored. They said it was our word against theirs, like our word don't matter because of how we look." Blake and Cruz exchange increasingly nervous glances as the scope of investigation exceeds their expectations by miles. Their union lawyer attempts damage control through traditional tactics, arguing that isolated incidents and split-second decisions shouldn't destroy careers built on public service. "These officers risk their lives daily protecting our community," he pleads with practiced emotion. "Minor judgment errors shouldn't end careers dedicated to law and order." The defense strategy relies on sympathy and professional solidarity, the same approach that's protected countless officers from accountability over the decades. Marcus listens with perfect judicial composure, his training masking the personal investment burning beneath his robes. Federal civil rights investigators present their findings. Systematic targeting based on race, falsified reports, planted evidence, and conspiracy to violate constitutional rights. The case extends far beyond individual misconduct to institutional corruption that demands federal intervention. Blake and Cruz realize they're facing federal charges rather than administrative discipline, and their faces pale as the true magnitude of their situation becomes clear. Blake finally looks directly at the judge for the first time, studying his features with growing unease. Something familiar nags at his memory, a face from somewhere recent, but where? The recognition remains frustratingly elusive, buried beneath assumptions and prejudices that blind him to obvious truth. Marcus calls for a brief recess, allowing tension to build while Blake and Cruz huddle desperately with their lawyer in the hallway, their earlier confidence replaced by mounting panic and confusion. When proceedings resume, Marcus announces the introduction of additional evidence that will change everything. The court has obtained surveillance footage from recent incidents not previously reviewed by the defendants, he states with judicial precision. Security monitors throughout the courtroom display crystal-clear video from the rest stop, footage of Blake and Cruz abusing the man who now sits in judgment over their careers and futures. The silence in the courtroom becomes deafening as the surveillance video plays in devastating detail. Blake and Cruz watch themselves humiliate, degrade, and assault the federal judge who now holds their professional lives in his hands. Their faces cycle through disbelief, terror, and desperate calculation as the impossible reality crashes down around them like an avalanche. The man they called boy, whom they forced to his knees, now towers above them from the federal bench, with the full authority of the United States government. Your Honor, their lawyer begins, his voice cracking with panic, we respectfully request immediate recusal based on obvious conflict of interest and... Denied, Marcus interrupts with surgical precision. This court finds no conflict of interest. The incident in question occurred during the investigation period and provides directly relevant evidence of the defendant's character, methods, and constitutional violations. His words fall like hammer blows, each syllable precisely delivered and legally unassailable. Blake's legs buckle beneath him as the full magnitude of their situation becomes clear. Cruz grabs the defendant's table for support, his hands shaking uncontrollably. They didn't just arrest a random black man for entertainment. They arrested a federal judge who now holds their careers, their freedom, and their entire futures in his constitutional authority. The power dynamic has reversed completely, and they are helpless to stop what's coming. Marcus addresses them directly for the first time since entering the courtroom. Officers Blake and Cruz, do you recognize the individual in this surveillance footage? His voice carries the weight of absolute judicial authority, each word precisely chosen for maximum legal impact. Blake tries to speak, but only stammers emerge. His earlier arrogance completely evaporated. The man he forced to say yes, sir, and no, sir, now demands his recognition from a position of ultimate power. Let the record reflect that the defendants appear to recognize the individual they arrested on false charges approximately 18 hours ago, Marcus states for the court stenographer. Every word becomes permanent legal record, documentation of their downfall and his vindication. Cruz attempts damage control through his lawyer, claiming good faith and suspicious behavior, but Marcus cuts through their excuses with judicial precision. Which part was suspicious? The black skin? The out-of-state plates? Or perhaps you found something suspicious about a law-abiding citizen stopping at a public rest area? The courtroom gallery shifts uncomfortably as spectators sense they're witnessing legal history in the making. Marcus stands at the bench, his full judicial authority radiating through the room like electricity. Officers Blake and Cruz, you stand accused of federal civil rights violations. The evidence includes your own body camera footage, witness testimony from community members, surveillance video of your assault on a federal judge, and your documented pattern of constitutional violations spanning multiple years. Their union representative scrambles desperately for legal footing, requesting time to prepare an adequate defense, but Marcus's response cuts like a blade. Time? Did you give me time last night when you planted evidence in my vehicle? Did you grant me time when you forced me to my knees on the asphalt? Did you allow me time to explain my identity before humiliating me for your entertainment and the amusement of your social media followers? The courtroom explosion happens immediately after Marcus's gavel strikes. Within minutes of the hearing's conclusion, news alerts buzz across the nation. Federal judge arrests officers who abused him hours earlier. The story spreads like wildfire through news networks, legal circles, and law enforcement communities across America. Blake and Cruz sit in federal holding cells, their roles completely reversed from the previous night, understanding that their stay won't end with morning release like Marcus's did. Police headquarters becomes crisis central as Chief Morrison receives the call that ends his career and potentially the careers of everyone in his command structure. Federal investigators descend on the department like an occupying army, seizing body camera footage, patrol car videos, dispatch recordings, and personnel files dating back years. Every interaction Blake and Cruz ever had gets scrutinized for patterns of abuse, and the investigation expands beyond 2 officers to encompass systematic corruption throughout the entire department. Internal Affairs, previously deaf to community complaints, suddenly discovers filing cabinets full of ignored reports spanning decades. The same witnesses they dismissed now provide federal investigators with names, dates, locations, and corroborating evidence that transforms individual complaints into a federal conspiracy case. District Attorney Catherine Wells faces a political firestorm as her office's cozy relationship with police unions comes under federal scrutiny, and prosecutors begin reviewing every case Blake and Cruz ever touched for potential perjury and evidence tampering. Wells holds an emergency press conference, attempting damage control while federal prosecutors work around her office entirely. We're conducting a thorough review of all cases involving these officers, she announces, but her words ring hollow as federal authorities take complete control of the investigation. State officials become spectators to federal justice. their local political considerations irrelevant to constitutional law enforcement. Blake's wife receives the devastating phone call at her nursing job and collapses in the hospital corridor, understanding that their middle-class life just evaporated overnight. House payments, children's college funds, retirement plans, everything built on his police salary disappears instantly, replaced by legal fees and federal prosecution. Cruz's girlfriend watches the news in horror as her boyfriend's face appears on national television, tagged by friends and strangers as a racist monster. She deletes her social media accounts, changes her phone number, and considers leaving the state entirely. The police union's high-powered lawyer works frantically to contain damage that cannot be contained. Federal civil rights violations against a sitting judge create unprecedented legal territory where no amount of political influence or legal maneuvering can undo documented constitutional crimes. Federal prosecutor Amanda Chen, assigned to lead the case, recognizes its national significance immediately. This isn't just about two corrupt officers, she explains to her prosecution team. This is about institutional reform, deterrence, and sending a message that no one is above constitutional law. Community activists, previously ignored by local officials for decades, find themselves courted by federal investigators hungry for evidence of systematic abuse. The reverend who led peaceful protests for years suddenly has the FBI seeking his testimony and documentation. Grassroots organizations provide investigators with years of carefully maintained records that federal prosecutors now treat as evidence in a major civil rights case. Blake and Cruz's own body camera footage gets dissected frame by federal analysts. Audio enhancement reveals racial slurs they claimed were unclear or taken out of context. Video analysis shows evidence planting in sharp detail, and their own documentation becomes the prosecution's strongest weapon against them. The rental car company provides GPS data showing Marcus's normal travel patterns with no stops consistent with drugged activity, completely demolishing their suspicious behavior justifications. 6 months later, Blake and Cruz face sentencing in the same courtroom where their nightmare began, though Judge Marcus Thompson recused himself from their criminal trial to ensure completely impartial proceedings. The damage was already irreversible. Federal conviction on multiple civil rights charges carries mandatory minimum sentences that will consume the remainder of their productive adult lives. Blake, now looking decades older than his 28 years, sits beside his court-appointed attorney after his family's savings disappeared into legal fees that couldn't prevent the inevitable. His wife filed for divorce and moved their children to another state, unwilling to bear the shame of association with a convicted racist who abused his badge for entertainment. His police pension was forfeited upon conviction, his reputation destroyed nationally, and his future reduced to a federal prison identification number. Cruz's transformation proves equally devastating as the swaggering officer who filmed abuse for entertainment now trembles as victim after victim testifies about years of harassment and constitutional violations. The defendant's actions struck at the very heart of American democracy, declares Judge Patricia Rodriguez during sentencing. When law enforcement officers violate the rights they swore to protect, they undermine the foundation of constitutional government and public trust in justice itself. Blake receives 8 years in federal prison, while Cruz gets 7 years plus 3 years of supervised release. Both forfeit law enforcement certification permanently and face lifetime bans from any position involving public trust. Their former police department operates under federal oversight with court-mandated reforms, massive settlement payouts to documented victims, and complete leadership replacement. Chief Morrison retired in disgrace, half the command staff faced investigation, and the city council hired a completely new police chief from outside the state with explicit mandate for cultural transformation. Community activists, emboldened by federal support and vindication, demand broader changes that extend far beyond individual prosecutions. The reverend who testified leads weekly community forums where residents interact with reformed officers as neighbors rather than adversaries, slowly rebuilding trust through consistent positive contact and transparent accountability. Robert, the elderly cab driver whose testimony proved crucial, receives a federal civil rights award and supplemental pension in recognition of his decades documenting police abuse that official channels ignored. Blake's former partner from years earlier commits suicide rather than face federal investigation, leaving a note mentioning the weight of silence and watching injustice happen without speaking up. The tragedy illustrates how institutional corruption destroys everyone it touches, even those who merely witnessed abuse without participating directly. Cruz attempts a prison interview claiming his actions weren't racially motivated but simply aggressive policing, but when presented with video evidence of his racial slurs and planted evidence, he breaks down completely. His tearful confession goes viral as required viewing in police academies nationwide, a cautionary tale about how personal prejudice and institutional protection create monsters wearing badges. Federal investigators eventually uncover the department's informal quota system that rewarded officers for generating revenue through questionable stops targeting minority drivers. Blake and Cruz weren't anomalies. They were products of incentive structures that made constitutional violations profitable for career advancement. Industry and systemic reform snapshot. The Thompson case becomes a watershed moment in American law enforcement, sparking nationwide reforms that transform police culture from the ground up. Departments across the country implement mandatory bias training, universal body camera requirements, and independent oversight boards with real authority to investigate misconduct. Federal funding now depends on demonstrating measurable progress in community relations and constitutional compliance through statistical evidence rather than political promises. The International Association of Chiefs of Police issues new national standards for traffic stops that explicitly prohibit the tactics Blake and Cruz employed as routine procedure. The Thompson incident exposed dangerous vulnerabilities in our profession that we can no longer ignore. Their official statement reads, "We must evolve our practices or face federal intervention that removes local control entirely." Police academies nationwide revise their curricula completely, requiring recruits to study the Thompson case as a detailed example of how personal prejudice destroys careers, communities, and constitutional trust. New psychological screening identifies candidates with racial bias tendencies before they receive badges and authority over others, preventing their entry into law enforcement entirely. The Federal Bureau of Investigation creates a dedicated civil rights enforcement division focused exclusively on prosecuting police misconduct, with the same resources traditionally reserved for organized crime and terrorism. The Thompson case becomes their template for aggressive federal intervention in local law enforcement corruption. Community policing initiatives expand nationally with measurable success in reducing complaints and improving public trust through positive engagement rather than aggressive enforcement. Technology companies develop artificial intelligence systems that monitor police interactions in real time for bias indicators, allowing supervisors to intervene before situations escalate into constitutional violations or violent confrontations. Federal courts establish expedited procedures for civil rights cases involving law enforcement, ensuring that judges like Thompson receive institutional support when confronting police misconduct, rather than facing isolation and political pressure. Police unions lose significant political power as public opinion shifts decisively toward accountability over protection, and collective bargaining agreements can no longer shield officers who violate constitutional rights from meaningful consequences. The Thompson case influences international law enforcement training as police departments in developed nations study American mistakes to implement safeguards preventing similar incidents. Legal scholars debate whether personal experience should disqualify judges from related cases, with the Thompson precedent suggesting that victims can maintain judicial objectivity when proper institutional protections ensure fair proceedings and constitutional due process. 5 years after that fateful night at Pinewood Rest Stop, Judge Marcus Thompson sits in his chambers reviewing the afternoon's docket, his nameplate now symbolizing justice served and systems reformed rather than authority ignored. His reputation extends far beyond his courtroom, as legal journals publish his articles on judicial independence and civil rights enforcement, while law schools invite him to lecture on constitutional protection and institutional accountability. The rest stop, where his nightmare began, features a historical marker reading, "Site of the Thompson Incident, a turning point in American civil rights enforcement." Travelers pause to read about the federal judge who transformed personal victimization into institutional change, proving that individual courage can reshape systematic injustice when supported by constitutional authority and community solidarity. Blake serves his remaining years in federal prison, participating in rehabilitation programs addressing racial bias and anger management, while writing letters to community groups expressing what appears to be genuine remorse. Whether his transformation represents sincere change or strategic positioning for eventual parole, his public acknowledgement of wrongdoing helps heal community wounds that fester for decades under official denial. Cruz, released after serving his full sentence, works construction jobs and speaks at police academies about the personal and professional consequences of badge abuse. His freedom comes with lifetime supervision and permanent exclusion from law enforcement, and he describes prison as earning a painful degree in consequences that taught him empathy through direct experience of powerlessness and systematic dehumanization. Their former police department continues operating under federal oversight with no end date specified, but community complaints dropped 78% after implementing comprehensive reforms. Officer recruitment now focuses on community service orientation rather than aggressive enforcement mentality, and the cultural transformation proves that meaningful change becomes possible when leadership commits to constitutional principles over political convenience. Chief Morrison, forced into early retirement and professional disgrace, operates a small security consulting firm teaching bias recognition to corporate clients seeking to avoid liability. His personal redemption through education cannot fully escape the shadow of institutional failures he enabled through willful blindness and political calculation. Robert, now 75 years old, received federal recognition and pension supplements for his decades documenting police abuse that official channels systematically ignored. He still drives occasionally, sharing stories with passengers about persistence, courage, and the slow but inevitable arc of justice bending toward accountability when good people refuse to accept injustice as unchangeable. Thompson maintains judicial perspective on his transformative experience, often explaining to law students that justice isn't revenge. Justice is creating systems that prevent future victims while holding wrongdoers accountable for their deliberate choices. His measured response elevated the incident's significance beyond personal vindication to institutional reform that protects countless future travelers from similar abuse. Power without accountability corrupts absolutely. Accountability without power enables injustice. True justice requires both, in perfect constitutional balance. The Thompson case proves that individual courage can transform systematic injustice, but only when institutions support accountability over protection and communities demand constitutional compliance over comfortable silence. Every traffic stop, every police interaction, every moment when authority meets vulnerability carries potential for either abuse or justice, depending on choices made by people wearing badges and people witnessing their actions. Share this story with friends who believe change is impossible, family members in law enforcement who think a few bad apples excuse systematic problems, and community leaders who accept injustice as inevitable reality. The Thompson transformation demonstrates that one moment of moral clarity and institutional courage can reshape entire systems when supported by federal authority and constitutional principles. Comment below about your experiences with police misconduct. Did you report it? What prevented you from speaking up? And how can communities better support witnesses who risk retaliation for telling truth to power? The community members who testified against Blake and Cruz made their federal prosecution possible through collective courage that overcame individual fear of institutional retaliation. Hit the notification bell for more stories of justice prevailing over injustice, powerless individuals discovering hidden strength, and systematic change emerging from personal courage supported by constitutional authority. Federal prosecutors increasingly target police misconduct nationwide, but only sustained community pressure ensures meaningful reform rather than cosmetic changes designed to deflect criticism without addressing root causes. Next week, discover how a homeless veteran's simple act of kindness exposed a corporate conspiracy stealing millions from military families through predatory lending schemes targeting financially vulnerable service members. When big business targets those who served our country, sometimes the smallest gestures of human decency carry the greatest power to expose systematic fraud and institutional corruption. The CEO thought he was untouchable until he tried to cheat the wrong homeless hero who understood that honor means protecting those who protected us all. Share your military service stories, experiences with corporate injustice targeting veterans, or examples of unexpected kindness creating powerful consequences that restore faith in human decency. Your stories inspire our research and remind us that justice takes many forms across different communities united by shared values of service, sacrifice, and constitutional protection. Follow our accounts for daily updates on civil rights cases, police reform progress measured through statistical evidence rather than political promises, and community activism, success stories that prove ordinary people can create extraordinary change. The Thompson case represents just the beginning. Federal intervention in local law enforcement continues expanding as communities demand constitutional protection over political convenience. Remember that Thompson's victory belongs to everyone who refuses to accept injustice as inevitable fate. Blake and Cruz's downfall warns every officer who thinks badges excuse constitutional violations. And their federal prosecution demonstrates that accountability reaches all levels of institutional power when communities unite behind constitutional principles rather than tribal loyalties. Justice delayed isn't justice denied. Sometimes it's justice perfected through patience, preparation, and constitutional authority wielded by those who understand that true power serves protection rather than domination.